My parents gave control of the family restaurant to my brother-in-law after pressure from my sister, but now everyone is looking for jobs because his fresh ideas are starting to stink. My family owns a small Italian restaurant that has been operating for over 20 years. My parents started it when I was 9 years old, and I've worked there in some capacity since I was 16. Initially, my parents let me work on weekends as an assistant. I cleaned tables, swept floors, and helped with basic kitchen prep. Later, I started working more hours and learned to take customer orders. After graduating, instead of going straight to college, I decided to work full-time at the restaurant to help my parents. I worked in every position at the restaurant. I started in the kitchen, learning to make our pasta sauces using my mother's recipes, and spent years mastering all our appetizers, salads, and desserts. Then I moved to the main cooking station where I learned to prepare every dish on the menu. I also worked as a waiter for 6 months to understand customer preferences and how to handle difficult situations. My parents also taught me how to place orders with suppliers, manage inventory schedule staff, and handle accounting. When our head chef left 3 years ago, I took over the kitchen for 4 months until we found a replacement. When our manager left 2 years ago, I also assumed those responsibilities. Last year, my parents officially appointed me general manager and started discussing me taking complete control of the restaurant when they retired. The problem is my sister, who is older than me, and my brother-in-law. My sister never worked at the restaurant except for a few weeks in high school when my parents forced her to help because they needed assistance. She hated every minute, constantly complaining about the smell of garlic on her clothes and how tired she was after shifts. She went to college and now has her own job. My brother-in-law worked at the restaurant for about 2 years. He was decent at some tasks, but wasn't someone you could give a lot of responsibility to. He also had some issues, but he was tolerated because he was family. About 6 months ago, my sister began suggesting that my brother-in-law should run the restaurant instead of me. She argued he had experience and a business degree, which was true, though it was from a community college. She also claimed it was unfair for me to be in charge just because I was the son when my older and more mature brother-in-law was available. Initially, my parents ignored these comments, knowing how much I had worked and learned every aspect of the business. However, my sister persisted, calling my mother several times a week to complain. The situation worsened when my brother-in-law started echoing her sentiments and adding his own remarks. 2 months ago, during a family meeting at my parents' house, my sister spent an hour listing all the reasons why my brother-in-law should run the restaurant instead of me. She said he had fresh ideas that I lacked, which could affect the restaurant long-term. My brother-in-law was there nodding along to everything my sister said. He added that he had been thinking about this for months and believed he could increase our profits by at least 20% in 6 months. He had an idea for a catering business, adding a lunch buffet and starting to offer cooking classes. My parents finally gave in to the pressure 3 weeks ago. They called me into the office and told me they wanted to try something new. They asked if I would be willing to step back for 3 months and let my brother-in-law take over as interim manager. They said I could use a break and that perhaps my brother-in-law's ideas could help the business grow. I asked if they were serious, and my father said they felt it would be fair to give my brother-in-law a chance to prove what he could do. I agreed to step back, but I told them it wouldn't be a break. I would be leaving permanently to find another job. My brother-in-law started 2 weeks ago, and I've kept away from the restaurant as promised. However, I've been receiving updates from our waiters and kitchen staff. The stories they tell me make it clear that my brother-in-law is completely out of his depth. During his first week, he decided to change our sauce recipes without consulting my mother. He thought they had too much garlic and cut the amount in half in both the marinade and meat sauces. 3 customers complained that their food tasted different, and a regular customer returned her pasta to the kitchen because the flavor wasn't the same. He also fired our head waitress, Maria, who had worked with us for 5 years. Maria was always professional and knew how to handle difficult customers. She was also fluent in Spanish, which helped us better serve our Latin clientele. My brother-in-law fired her because, according to him, she didn't show enough enthusiasm for his new ideas to improve customer service. He replaced her with someone my sister recommended, a new waitress who had never worked in a restaurant, so you can imagine how that turned out. My sister has been going to the restaurant almost every day since my brother-in-law took over. She acts like some kind of consultant, walking around with a notepad and observing everything. Yesterday, my parents called me asking me to come to the restaurant to help because my brother-in-law was having issues with supplier payments. Apparently, he messed up this week's food orders and we're running out of several key ingredients. They sounded stressed and asked if I could just go for a few hours to fix it. I told them no. Now my sister complains that I didn't help with the transition, which is why her husband is having problems. She claims I'm doing it for revenge, and because I'm jealous, my parents chose him. The worst part is that my brother-in-law has proven to be completely useless in just 2 weeks, which doesn't surprise me. But it does surprise my parents because they genuinely thought his fresh ideas would be better than my experience. The reality is this: I've already started looking for another job and have had a couple of interviews that went very well. I believe it's a breath of fresh air for me to gain new experiences and step away from the family business. Furthermore, my parents have given the business to someone incompetent, and it has been one of the worst business decisions I've ever seen. Do you think I should go back and help, or has that ship already sailed? Update 1. I ultimately decided not to help. I had follow-up interviews for some job opportunities and decided to pursue those, which meant my brother-in-law continued making more and more mistakes on his own. Our regular customers started complaining more frequently about the quality of the food and service. My brother-in-law kept changing recipes and procedures without understanding why we did things a certain way. For example, he replaced our pizza dough with a frozen crust that made our pizzas taste like cardboard, a sacrilege for an Italian restaurant. The financial situation wasn't much better by his fourth week. On one hand, he was saving on ingredients, while on the other, he was wasting more and more money. Our food cost increased by almost 30% because he was buying expensive ingredients we didn't need while running out of staples like flour and cheese. He also forgot to pay the insurance premium, and we received a cancellation notice. My brother-in-law's personnel management reached a critical point when he fired 2 more longtime employees. He let go of our cook with 4 years of experience because Tony, a pure-blooded Italian, couldn't stand my brother-in-law's nonsense. He also fired our most reliable weekend waitress because she refused to use his scripted greeting with customers. I also believe my sister was jealous as she continued to show up at the restaurant. She convinced my brother-in-law to spend money on new, more sophisticated menus, as she called them, even though they weren't actually necessary. The situation exploded during my brother-in-law's 5th week when we received complaints from the health department. He had been ignoring our standard food safety procedures, and an inspector found several violations, including improper food storage temperatures and lack of cleanliness. We received a warning that could have resulted in temporary closure if not corrected immediately. That same week, my brother-in-law made a decision that finally forced my parents to act. Without consulting anyone, he secured an expensive catering service for a 150-person wedding reception. The problem was that he promised dishes we had never prepared before and offered a price barely above the cost of food. Furthermore, he scheduled this catering service for a Saturday when we are normally busiest. When my parents learned about the catering disaster 2 days before the wedding, they panicked and called me. My father explained the situation and asked me to help them manage the event without ruining our reputation. I told them I wouldn't help because I already had a formal offer for a new position. That's why my father had to return to full-time work to fix this. My father is still involved in the business, but much less so over the years. The business had even changed a lot since I took control as it had grown, and my father wasn't used to this. As far as I know, the catering event didn't go very well. My father managed to deliver it, but at the cost of significant losses. After the catering crisis, my parents officially ended my brother-in-law's trial period, but instead of firing him, which was the right thing to do, they asked him to return to his previous position as assistant manager. He refused, saying he wouldn't accept a demotion after having proven he could handle greater responsibilities. My sister supported his stance and told them they hadn't given him enough time to implement his ideas, claiming, "These things take time." My brother-in-law and sister left the restaurant that same day and haven't returned since, apparently offended. My sister called my mother several times during the following week, demanding an apology and insisting that my brother-in-law deserved another chance. My parents told her no, but my sister is angry with them and told them they would regret it. My father has been trying to repair the damage my brother-in-law caused, but I don't know if he has the experience to do so. For example, some employees have refused to return because they feel they were treated very poorly by my brother-in-law. Others are ready to be hired at my new job. They are great employees and could be very useful to me in my new experience. My father faces the difficult task of rebuilding relationships with our regular customers and restoring their faith that the quality of service and food will return to what it once was, which I find difficult because it's not as if there aren't other Italian restaurants they can go to after a bad experience with this one. We are talking about losses of over $1,000. It might seem like a lot, but profit margins in a restaurant aren't that high, and that can make all the difference in a bad semester. Another problem I know my parents have encountered is receipts for supplies and equipment that never arrived at the restaurant. After calling suppliers to inquire about these missing items, they discovered that my brother-in-law had been having them delivered to a different address. It turns out my brother-in-law was using the restaurant's supplier accounts for his own benefit buying equipment and supplies for his own catering business. He had been planning to open a competing restaurant and was using the restaurant's money to buy what he needed to start. The address where the supplies were being sent was a commercial kitchen my brother-in-law had been renting across town. My father called my brother-in-law to confront him about the missing supplies, but he claimed it was all a misunderstanding. He said he was only temporarily storing some restaurant equipment elsewhere and intended to return everything. My sister called my mother the next day screaming that they were unfairly attacking my brother-in-law. She said he was just trying to help the family business by exploring expansion opportunities. She accused them of being paranoid and trying to make my brother-in-law look bad because they were jealous of his success. My parents have been trying to get my brother-in-law to return the equipment and supplies he took, but he has been avoiding their calls. My sister sent a text message saying my brother-in-law would return everything once they apologized for treating him badly. My sister hasn't spoken to me, which is fine because I didn't go back to avoid this drama. She still occasionally calls our parents to defend my brother-in-law's actions, but refuses to acknowledge that she married a complete idiot, a thief, or both. I'm glad I made the decision I did because otherwise I'd be dragged into this situation now. I don't even know if the restaurant is salvageable at this point because I haven't seen the financial records with my own eyes. Update 2. Approximately 3 weeks after my last update, my brother-in-law finally returned most of the equipment and supplies he had taken from the restaurant. He brought it on a day my parents weren't there and left everything in our storage without any explanation. Some items were missing and several pieces of equipment were damaged according to what employees told me, but my parents decided not to pursue the matter further to avoid more family conflict. My sister had been avoiding all contact with our family since some of the items were returned. She stopped calling my parents and didn't attend my mother's birthday dinner, which deeply affected her. When my parents tried to call her, she wouldn't answer or would hang up as soon as she heard their voices. But then my sister started showing up at the restaurant again, not to help or apologize, but to cause problems with the customers. The first incident occurred one Friday night, one of our busiest days, when my sister arrived with 3 friends and demanded a table despite us being fully booked. When our hostess explained they would have to wait about an hour, my sister declared she was the owner's daughter and there had to be a table for her. She began complaining loudly that the restaurant had gotten worse and that the service used to be better. She spoke loudly enough for other customers to hear, making comments about how our family didn't know how to run a business. She finally left without eating, but not before creating an uncomfortable scene that ruined other diners' meals. That pattern continued over the following weeks. My sister would come during the busiest hours and find reasons to complain about everything from the dining room temperature to the speed of service. She made negative comments about the food and told other customers that she knew better restaurants in the area. She also started leaving negative reviews on social media using fake accounts. The situation worsened when my sister began directly contacting regular customers. She obtained phone numbers from old reservation lists and started calling people to tell them about alleged problems she had witnessed at the restaurant. She told them she had seen mice in the kitchen or that health department violations were more serious than admitted. These calls were completely false but caused several customers to cancel reservations or stop coming to the restaurant. My parents finally decided they had to take measures when my sister's sabotage reached the employees. She called a waitress and told her that the restaurant was ruined and that she should look for another job immediately. My sister claimed it would probably close in a few months and that she would soon be unemployed. That employee went to work the next day and asked if the restaurant was really in trouble, which isn't entirely untrue from what I know. My parents had to reassure her by telling her there were no plans to close. I recently learned that my sister and brother-in-law had taken their sabotage campaign to the next level. It was an alleged complaint of mistreatment and harassment filed on behalf of the employees. That article was the last straw for my parents, though not entirely so. They had been hoping my sister would eventually calm down and apologize for her behavior. My father called my sister and told her she was no longer welcome at the restaurant and that she should stop trying to harm our business. My sister responded by threatening to sue them for defamation, claiming they had been spreading lies about my brother-in-law. She demanded that they publish a public apology and pay my brother-in-law compensation for lost business opportunities. They consulted with a lawyer who reviewed all the evidence they had collected about my brother-in-law's theft and my sister's sabotage campaign. The lawyer told us that my sister's threats were baseless and that, in fact, they had grounds to take legal action against her for both harassment and intentional interference with their business relations. My parents decided not to file a lawsuit. I still don't know why, but they authorized the lawyer to send a cease and desist letter to my sister and brother-in-law demanding they stop contacting customers, employees, and suppliers. The letter also warned them that all available legal measures would be taken if their harassment continued. The worst part of this whole situation is that the restaurant isn't doing much better, and it's not just because of my sister. Some friends I still have inside tell me that things are very slow and my father can't do enough to improve them. Even if my sister stops bothering them, it's possible the business might close its doors. I can't know how serious it is from the outside, but I can estimate it knowing that the restaurant was profitable when things were well-oiled. But now I don't believe it is, and it makes me a little sad because I put many years into it. I'm now working in a new restaurant that isn't Italian, and I don't plan to return after being pushed out. I'm doing well now, and I like the fact that family and work don't mix here. In my case, it turned out to be a bad combination. Update 3. For about a month after the cease and desist letter, my sister and brother-in-law stayed away from the restaurant and stopped their harassment campaign. Some things had improved at the restaurant, and I thought it would be saved. However, a week ago, my parents gathered all the employees and told them they would have to close the business because it was no longer profitable to keep it open. One of the employees told me that my parents were crying when they told them all this and that they apologized for not having done enough. I feel bad for the employees because they are the ones who suffered the most from the decisions of my parents, my brother-in-law, and my sister. I've been trying to hire them for the restaurant where I work, but there aren't that many positions available. Although my boss has offered me the chance to open a new restaurant in the neighboring town where I would be fully in charge and have the opportunity to hire staff. For now, it's just a proposal and not a certainty, but this seems like the perfect opportunity for me. I need to have a conversation with him when he returns from vacation. Now, my parents have decided to sue my sister and brother-in-law, even filing a theft complaint against my brother-in-law. I believe they've waited too long, and this just shows what would have happened if I had agreed to return. I would have been trapped in the middle of all this with my sister trying to ruin the business while my parents hesitated to take action until we finally reached these extremes. These are those difficult decisions to make at the time, but viewed from a distance, it seems to have been the right one. It saved me from the drama and from parents who haven't known how to respond to a spoiled daughter. Update 4. I bring good news. My employer has decided to greenlight the second restaurant project, and we are already working to open that new location. He has given me considerable freedom with the construction, and I'm working with a contractor as quickly as possible to inaugurate in a couple of months. I've been contacting all of my parents' former employees to come work with me. Some are enthusiastic about the idea, while others have already started finding other jobs. Unfortunately, I can't pay them a salary right now until the restaurant opens, and they also can't wait that long until it's ready. Regardless, I will employ all those who haven't yet found work or decide to wait until the new restaurant opens. My parents have finally made the right decision. In addition to filing a complaint against my brother-in-law, they have also sued my sister and brother-in-law for defamation and damages for having caused the restaurant's closure. I'm a bit removed from all the drama, because although I still talk to my parents, they prefer not to dwell too much on the lawsuit, as they seem to be struggling with the decision to take their own daughter to court. I've told them that she showed no remorse for ruining them, so they shouldn't feel sorry for her, but that's how my parents are weak-hearted. That's why they are in the situation they are both looking for employment, because they've lost the family business that had them semi-retired. Update 5. The restaurant has been open for 8 months and is performing better than anticipated. At least my boss is happy with the results. For those who asked why I didn't venture to open my own, the reason is that I prefer to save my own money and not go into debt to open a restaurant. Anyone who works in this sector knows how difficult it is to have a successful restaurant and that the failure rate is very high. However, my boss and I are analyzing the idea of opening another one in which we will be partners, contributing an equal amount of capital. I have also brought over all the employees from the family restaurant. I could almost 75% of the staff. It's as if nothing has changed since I worked at the other restaurant, with the difference that the owner isn't my parents, and there's no intention of bringing anyone with fresh ideas into the business. My parents have finally obtained a favorable verdict in their lawsuits and complaints, and my sister has faced the consequences. Both she and my brother-in-law will have to pay close to $45,000 for damages related to defamation, theft, and other situations included in my parents' lawsuit. Additionally, my brother-in-law received probation and a fine for having stolen from my parents' restaurant. My sister also lost her job as she was asked to resign after her trial became more public than her employers desired. For now, my father has accepted a job while my mother has chosen not to return to work.